Hey everybody, welcome to today's lesson here at Active Self-Protection Extra. Today, an interesting one, a little bit different. I read a very interesting article in Men's Health magazine that was titled, "What Guns Do to Men's Brains?" And I went into it with great trepidation, but it was actually an interesting article. So I'm going to link it below and want to talk to you about it. The Storm Hunter WX weather app is free to download and use and provides you with warning of severe weather even before the National Weather Services issue alerts. This advanced weather app is an important tool for awareness of severe weather that I use every day. Download and use it totally free without in-app purchases on iOS or Android at the link below. I gotta be honest with you, anytime I see in any major publication anything to do with people and firearms, I always cringe immediately because there's a high chance that whatever is about to be written about is probably stupid, quite frankly. It's probably a caricature. I worry about bias in the writing. And so often it ends up just being kind of a mess. And I was absolutely expecting this. This morning, I tend to peruse my news and I'm perusing my news this morning like normal, and I see an article in Men's Health magazine. Now, I follow Men's Health because if you're following along with me, I've been working for the last 16 months on my physical health and my body, and getting some advice out of Men's Health has been good for me. So I follow that, and I follow it in my Apple News Plus subscription, okay? This month's article in Men's Health, the November-December 2024 article, it's got Bronny James on the cover of it, has this article, "What Guns Do to Men's Brains?" Now, I was looking on their website, and I'm going to put a link to the Apple News story in the description. I can't find it on their website, so I don't think they have published it in their general website. I have a subscription to that magazine as part of my Apple News Plus subscription. If you get Men's Health, that will probably show up. If you have Apple News Plus, then the link will work for you. If you don't, I'm sorry, I can't find it on the general World Wide Web for you to read all of it, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. And because I think there are a couple of takeaways in it that are kind of interesting, actually, that I will say first off and immediately that the reporting in here, and I wouldn't call it reporting, Men's Health is not a news magazine. It is an advice magazine for dudes to, get ripped abs and, have better relationships and those things. And it's a decent magazine. It doesn't get political, doesn't do any of those things. But I was worried about this. And the writing style, I think, was quite balanced and says there are benefits to owning firearms and there are risks and dangers to owning firearms. Yes, I love that. So what they did was, I don't know how they identified the 1,211 men who are firearms owners that they sent this survey to. They sent it to them via SurveyMonkey. And I don't know how they identified those men, and I don't know how they controlled for other variables. So I cannot tell you, and they did not report the data. I don't have access to the raw data underneath things. So I can't tell you where the statistical viability is. I am not a statistician, okay? I am not a frontline researcher, so I don't dive into that stuff very carefully. But I think there were some interesting things, right? Like I remember, like 2017, 2018, I did a survey of concealed carriers. How did I do that survey? I made a Google Drive, a Google survey and sent it, put it on my social media, on my personal social media and on the Ask Facebook page and on the Ask YouTube channel community tab, and said, hey, if you're a concealed carrier, answer these questions. And then it was just self-report and what happened from there. So can I say that's representative? No, it's a group of people in my community. Likewise here, can I say they got a representative sample of gun owners? No, I can't say that. So I don't know the statistical validity to and applicability to the general population of America. I don't know what we're going to say with that. And I know plenty of gun owners who would look at a survey from an MD out at the UC Davis Health Center with great suspicion and would never answer it. So that can skew data and skew results. So saying all that, I think it was an interesting study. I'm going to do something here. I'm going to show you my age and put my glasses on because I'm going to be reading some stuff and reading glasses help me, okay? It showed a few things, and I'm going to give you some of the statistics and some of the stuff that it showed. I'm not going to give it all out. I don't want to, just copy their article, but I think there were some interesting things. Number one, by far, the number one reason for ownership of guns was for protection of the 1,211 people who responded. Number two was hunting, and the other category was very small, like 6-7%. They also found some interesting stuff in here about men who own one gun versus men who own 4 or more guns. That kind of singular firearm ownership did skew a little bit more, not much, but a little bit more towards hunting rather than for personal protection. However, it is kind of interesting in the self-reports. This is all self-reported stuff, right? There weren't any verifications on this stuff, just self-report. But men who own one gun, as opposed to men who own more than 4 or 4 or more guns, they were twice as likely to report that they had fired their gun in anger. It's very interesting. 50% more likely to say that they had fired their gun in fear. Now, what's the difference there? Obviously, different emotion, anger and fear, but I think it's just a kind of interesting difference. 60% more likely, the people who own one gun are 60% more likely to report on this study that they had threatened someone with a gun. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, you say, I threatened somebody with a gun. Why? I could certainly imagine if they were a deadly threat to you, but that wasn't sussed out, at least as far as I can see. And they are 25% more likely to have injured someone with a gun or to report that they've injured someone with a gun. And so you look at that and you're like, wow, that's kind of maybe counterintuitive. People would expect, I think, the people who own 4 or more guns to be more gun-ho, as it were, and to say, oh, well, wait a minute, I do things with my gun and I can do stuff. Well, actually, what I think it probably showed is that the people who have different guns, a lot of times if you have 4 guns, you probably have a concealed carry gun, you probably have a home defense gun, maybe you have a hunting gun, a shotgun or something like that, and then maybe a fun range gun, right? So that could be a 4-gun collection. Or maybe you got 2 hunting guns, you got a big game rifle and a bird shotgun, and then a home defense rifle and a personal, CCW gun. Or you got a concealed carry gun and a home defense pistol and a home defense rifle, and you get my point, right? Now, you get where I am and you go, how many guns do you have, John? I don't know. Lots. I'm that guy that they look at and, I've got, I don't know, 50, 60 guns, something like that. So I would be, way off the charts in this here. But those folks are probably more likely to have been involved in the firearms world a little bit more. And so they're less likely to do stupid things with guns. Whereas I think it's an interesting bit that, especially right now, I'm seeing a lot of people in my social space that know people who are frustrated about the election and going to buy their first gun. And of course, when the pandemic started, we had a lot of people go buy their first gun because they were worried about riots, quite frankly, worried about, what would happen during lockdowns. And those folks don't necessarily have not maybe been raised in a culture and in a place where they're taught safe firearms handling and responsible firearms handling. So that, I think, kind of points towards that who only own one gun. So what does that mean for us? Well, if you do only own one gun, that's fine. I don't have any problems with that. I don't have any problems with somebody who doesn't own any guns. That's totally a personal choice. Because you have the right to keep and bear arms doesn't mean that you have an obligation to. And some people shouldn't own guns. But I do think that if you do own guns, that you should make sure that you do so responsibly, that you don't threaten people with firearms or use a firearm to injure somebody, especially unintentionally, right? So be cautious with that. And now, of course, just because you own more than 4 or more guns doesn't mean you're automatically safe with a gun. So let's make sure that we are using that appropriately. I would say firing a gun in anger is probably not a good thing. That doesn't feel like a good thing to me. Fear, okay, I was at fear of my life. All right, I'm down with that. Anger, I was mad at him for doing X, and so I shot at him with a gun. Bad idea. Bad idea for everyone, right? And folks who are less experienced with firearms tend to do that kind of stuff more. So let's be cautious of that. Another couple things. 1 in 5 respondents. So that means out of 1,211 respondents, they had something like 240 or so who responded that they felt anxious, worried, or inadequate when their gun wasn't in reach. Now, that's only 1 in 5. So 80% of them reported that they didn't feel worried, inadequate, anxious when their gun wasn't in reach, and that's a very good thing, okay? But for those 20%, I think that a lot of those folks that bought one gun, they did so to feel safe. They did so because they felt vulnerable, and so they felt like having a force equalizer, a force multiplier, would give them competence, and so the gun makes them feel safe. I don't have a problem with that. However, I want to be cautious in saying, wait a minute, if I don't have it nearby or within arm's reach or in reach of me where I am, then that makes me anxious, worried, or feel inadequate. That's starting to cross the line into like disordered thinking and problem behaviors. Okay. So if that's you and you're one of those 20%, and of course, I would guess that the majority of people that are watching this channel are gun owners. And so if you feel like, man, if I don't have my gun on my person or right next to me at the nightstand or right where I can get it, well, I feel anxious, I feel worried, I feel nervous. I want to be very cautious with that. And I would encourage some internal work on that. And yeah, I do think most of us could use some therapy, quite frankly. We could use some time with a professional counselor, a licensed professional, to help us to unpack our emotions and our past traumas and to make sure that we're thinking well. And that's not negative to me. That's a very positive thing that we all could use some of that. But if you find yourself in those areas, this is the same thing that I say to men. If you find yourself with a cloud over your head more than a day or two every month, that you can't enjoy the things that you used to enjoy, that you don't have much appetite, or you're eating way too much, that you're having trouble sleeping, or you're sleeping all the time, that your sex drive is in the crapper, or those things, that you have a hard time enjoying life, that you feel like nothing matters anymore. Well, those are all signs of clinical depression. And if you see more than a couple of those, it's time to get checked out. Here in this case, the 1 in 5 who feel anxious, worried, or inadequate when they don't have their firearm within reach, that's bordering into problematic behavior. And we want to be better than that, right? We want to, and I'm not scolding you or saying you shouldn't feel that way. I'm saying I want you to dive into why. I want you to really think a little bit more about, wait a minute, why is that? Now, you might say, hey, I don't mind personally if I have to go out without a gun on. It's okay. I like to travel the world. My wife and I love to go all over the world. We were in Greece this last summer. I didn't take a gun with me to Greece, and I didn't feel worried or anxious or inadequate. I just didn't have the ability to reach out and touch someone as far as I could if I had my gun on me. I like being armed whenever I can because it gives me the ability to reach out and touch somebody if I need to. But it doesn't define who I am as a person. So that was an interesting thing. Out of these 1,200 respondents, about 20% of them showcased at least some kind of borderline here that the gun had become kind of part of their psyche. And I don't think that's healthy. So if you're worried about that in your own world, or if you see those signs, and maybe if you're like, gosh, I don't know if I see those signs, go ask your loved ones, right? Go ask your spouse or somebody who lives with you, somebody who loves you. Because that's a kind of behavior that we want to be real cautious of. All right. Now, some other interesting bits out of this article. 11% of respondents strongly agreed that it made them feel like more of a man. 11% strongly agreed with the statement that owning a gun made them feel like more of a man. Now, another 12% somewhat agreed with that. So that's almost a quarter of people that said, yeah, owning a gun, at least in some respects, makes me feel like more of a man. I don't understand that. That does mean that 75% of respondents said, no, owning a gun does not make me feel like more of a man. Good. That's the healthy side, okay? Gun ownership is not a projection of manhood. It's as simple as that. Gun ownership is, ownership of any piece of property does not make you a man or not a man. I think that I don't want to delve into all the gender identity politics right now. That's well beyond the scope of this. But I think a man is not defined as to whether they own a gun or not, or whether they can drive a manual transmission or not, or whether they can do quote unquote traditional manly things or not. There are lots of ways to be a man, in my opinion, and therefore, and to express manhood. And I say that as a guy who does almost all of the traditional manly stuff and owns lots of guns. So And I will say this as well, those 11% who strongly agreed it made them feel like more of a man, those men were much more likely to have participated in the risky behaviors that I said above, to have fired in anger or to threaten somebody with a gun or to injure someone with a gun. And so, again, that is one of those risk analysis questions from this article that I think you should really think about. If you're like, yeah, man, owning a gun is what men do, and it makes me feel like more of a man that I own a gun, that's actually a warning sign, friend, that makes you much more likely to participate in risky behaviors with that gun. And of course, what we want, what we strongly encourage at Active Self-Protection is for everybody to be a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person, not to participate in risky behaviors or inappropriate or wrong behaviors with firearms, quite frankly. So that was an interesting finding. Another interesting finding in the study that there was some broad agreements between Democrats and Republicans who responded. There was some interesting stuff here. Okay, I'm going to find that real quick here. That of those, 95% of Democrats and 98% of Republicans respondents said that their friends and family know that they have a gun. Okay. 96% of Republicans and 94% of Democrats say that my mental health has improved or stayed the same since owning a gun. That's cool. Both of them, 80% of gun owners say when I was growing up, at least one family member owned a gun. 81% of both the Republicans and Democrats said that. Here's an interesting one as well. To the statement, I feel safer owning a gun, 79% of Republicans said yes, and 75% of Democrats that are gun owners and responded to this survey said that. Okay, I think that's interesting. Of particular note, 95% combined of respondents said that their mental health either stayed the same or improved since owning a firearm. So I think that sometimes we get this narrative in the news of, gun owners they feel the world is unsafe and they have wrong ideas and the world isn't any safer. Well, that's not how they respond to that in their own world, which is kind of interesting. Now, of course, the gun owners, when they responded, if they asked a question, how much do you agree with the statement, we live in a dangerous world? About 83% of respondents said that they either strongly or somewhat agreed that we live in a dangerous world. Well, again, a firearm is a force multiplier, and that is a major reason why people own firearms, is to mitigate danger. And so that's not surprising at all. Interesting stuff here. They did ask a question about whether they believed in the Second Amendment. Men who agreed with and believed in the Second Amendment, they said, do you feel safer owning a gun? 77% of them said yes. But of those who strongly disagreed that they believed in the Second Amendment, said they felt safer owning a gun. 58% of those people who disagreed with the Second Amendment. Of those, has your mental health improved since owning a gun? People who disagreed with the Second Amendment, 21% of those people said their mental health has improved since they owned a gun. Now, an interesting bit there too. Again, people who feel against the Second Amendment, they are asked the question, do you feel the same when your gun isn't within reach? 50% of them said yes. Okay, that's interesting stuff. So again, 95% said that their mental health improved or stayed the same since owning a firearm. Okay, I'm going to read you the last couple of paragraphs here because I think they're really important. They're really interesting kind of end result from this particular article. And this is a quote from Amy Barnhorst, who is an MD, the Vice Chair of Community Mental Health at UC Davis Health and Director of Bullet Points, which is a project that provides tools to clinicians for firearm injury prevention. We are all about firearm injury prevention. Here's the last two paragraphs, and I think they're important and a good wrap up to this article. There are mental health benefits to responsible gun ownership, Dr. Barnhorst says. Ties to family heritage, connection to a gun-owning community, the fun of going to a range or hunting with friends, and then in italics, feeling safer. But there are also mental health risks. About 20% of men in our survey said that they feel anxious, worried, or inadequate when their gun isn't within reach. Now we have a quote from her. When a gun becomes part of your psyche, that's where we see the potential for risk. Dr. Barnhorst says, the majority of gun deaths in the US are suicides that tend to happen in the quiet of people's homes, often with a cloak of secrecy around them, so people don't know how often they happen. The goal, Dr. Barnhorst says, is not to take the approach that guns are bad and that people shouldn't have them. But it's also important not to overvalue a gun's ability to make you more of anything. People who are focused on the risks don't see the benefits of gun ownership, Dr. Barnhorst says, and vice versa. I think that is an excellent thing. Now, you might be able to hear that the landscapers are starting in the side yard here next door to my house, so that's a good place for us to end. An excellent and interesting article. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you heard in some of this data. And again, I've put a link to it in the description. If you're not a member of Men's Health or you don't have an Apple Plus subscription, you probably won't be able to read that. I'm sorry, I can't find it in the general web. I just thought it was an interesting article and should lead us to some good discussions about mental health, about how guns are part of our psyche. And my question for you at the end of this, if you've listened to this far, and if you're willing to say, how many guns do you own? Would you put yourself in that category? I'm telling you, I probably own 5 dozen. I got guns for all kinds of purposes, some for hunting of various different kinds of games, some for personal protection, rifles, pistols, shotguns, you name it, I got them. And I just have a bunch of them. How about you?